All right, so we're gonna get started. So just to kind of give you guys a bit of a context on what we're gonna do today, it's a little bit different than some of the workshops that you guys have run in the past. And the way we're gonna do it is that most of the time is gonna be used on actually running a workshop. I've done this before, and people have been telling me that they really like it. So I figured, why not? Let's try to do this one more time for this cohort. The only ask that I have is that just to kind of be mindful of the existing cohort participants and previous cohort participants, I ask that we only engage those in this particular session, and people that are just like auditing, they won't be involved just because it's going to be very engaging. We're going to do a lot of back and forth, and this is the way for us to be able to kind of arrive at something productive. So before we get started, what I'm going to do is to kind of quickly go over a framework that we've used at PM exercises. Some of you might be already familiar with it, but I think this framework gives you an idea of how to deal with a situation where you have to kind of make some sort of a technical trade-off decision, right? And what I like about this framework is that it not only works for interview prep, it actually works really well for your full-time job. So let's quickly go over that. And I think the best way for us to really learn this is through practice. So here's the link to the framework. I'm going to share with you guys in a bit. But for now, I'm just going to quickly go over this to kind of make sure that you're all aware, you're all aware of it. So here's the link. Um, the framework works as follows. Let's say you're given a situation that seems to be very technical. It could be like, should we use technology A or should we use technology B, right? Or it could be something like, what should be our, the technical decision here. We have a few different options in front of us. At a very high level, what I suggest that we would be doing is first, we need to really kind of understand the situation that we're dealing with. We try to get as much clarity as we can, like how much time do we have? What's our budget? What are we trying to get done? All this stuff. It's worth spending some time to kind of get clarity on the scope of the problem that we're trying to kind of give an answer to, right? Really important for us to do that. And after we do that, after we spend some time, and we're going to do that for one particular example today, right? After we do that, then we're going to spend some time to kind of think about the attributes that are relevant in the context of the particular question that's given to us, right? And these attributes would be case by case different. Sometimes it could be, I don't know, maybe latency, sometimes user experience, sometimes engagement. Maybe in the context of AI, there are other attributes like accuracy, privacy, anything that we think is like kind of relevant is like something that we have to keep in mind when we're making our decision, right? We want to make a list of them. And if you notice so far, I haven't really spent so much time to kind of think about what the right decision is. First, I tried to really understand the problem statement. Then I identified a bunch of relevant attributes that I think are important, right? And this step itself could take a lot of time. And then after that, we would say, okay, given where the company is and given where the product is, what should be our goal at this moment in time, right? What should be our product goal? And this product goal is usually a function of a bunch of different things. It's dependent on what are we trying to validate? Are we just like starting out? Is the product more mature? Are we trying to kind of validate whether or not there's demand for this, or are we trying to kind of go into a growth phase? So we'll spend some time to talk about that. We'll see how that impacts the next step of this technical decision-making process. And then finally, knowing what our goal is and knowing what sort of attributes are relevant, we're actually able to form an opinion in a shape of a recommendation, right? Like we can actually say, okay, we understand that these are all the different trade-offs, but given this is our priority at this particular moment in time, our recommendation is to move forward with this particular path because we think that this goal makes these particular attributes more important in the current context. And for that reason, this is the result of our evaluation, right? So very, very high level, just going to quickly repeat it. Step one, try to understand the problem statement. Step two, we're going to spend some time to understand what are the relevant attributes that we're dealing with, right? What attributes are important. Step three, we're going to come up with a goal that we think is important given where we are at this moment in time. And step four, we're going to be able to make a recommendation given the goal that we've identified for ourselves and the attributes that we came up with earlier, right? That's it. So we're going to put this in practice. We're going to use the next 15 minutes or so to actually put this in practice. I haven't been doing this for a while, so people asked if I could come in and run the session. I said, sure, why not? So we're going to do that. All right. So the question that we're going to do together today, right, is going to be right here. As you can see, we're building an AI tool that makes it easier to extract information from medical documents, right? We need to train a large language model with patient data to make the results more relevant. Which option is better? Should we use existing pre-trained models such as GPT, or should we build our own model using something like an open source service like Hugging Face, right? So the first thing you will notice is that the question is kind of vague. It's intentional, so don't worry about it. The fact that it's vague is not a big problem. We're going to be working together to come up with a solution. So what we're going to do together is we're going to spend time to try to answer this question using the framework that I highlighted earlier. This was the framework, right? Gentle reminder, understand the question first, come up with the relevant attributes. After you come up with the attributes, think about a goal, and finally make a recommendation given the goal and the attributes that we think are important. So with that said, what we're going to do is we're going to take a very collaborative approach. I strongly recommend people in the current cohort to be more engaged and try to answer, try to kind of raise their hands, share their thoughts, and we're going to try to answer all these questions together. And please use the raise hand feature at Zoom for us to kind of collaborate with each other. I'll be managing the session. So what is the first thing that we're going to do? Who's interested in kind of guiding me through this process? It sounds like a bit of a vague question. Of course it is. It's very intentional. So Scott, thank you for being courageous enough and to raise your hand. Please go ahead and share your thoughts. What do we need to do here?
Sure. Well, the first two questions, perhaps three, that jump out on me, and let's pretend this was real. I would say to you, thank you for the question. There are a couple of things I'm curious about. The first thing would be, when you say easier to extract information from medical documents, what kind of information are we talking about, and from what documents? And specifically, what are the data types? Is this from an electronic healthcare record system? Is this X-ray data? Is this textual data? All of the above. So that's the first question. What kind of data are we talking about? And then you mentioned as well, to make the results more relevant. What results are we talking about here? And again, there's two parts to that. When you say results, it seems to imply that you're already getting results of some sort. So what are you doing today? And if not, if you meant just results in general, what's your outcome here? What are we actually trying to achieve? Now, I could keep going, but those were my first two or three or four, and I'll stop now if somebody else wants to go, unless you want me to continue.
Got it. Thank you so much for these are great questions. You've already narrowed down the scope of the question significantly. You asked, like, we're talking about information. What sort of information are we talking about? What sort of information are we going to extract? So I'm going to kind of like make a bunch of assumptions here and quickly kind of type them to narrow down the scope of the question. So let's say we're dealing with, clinical trial data, right? And the data format is in the form of text, right? And what kind of data, what kind of result are we talking about? I think that was your first, second question is like, let's say we want to see if we can make a recommendation on the diagnosis This is the first time I'm both managing the session and running the session as a host as well. So it's kind of tricky. People keep joining the session. What kind of make a recommendation based on the results of the reports, right? So basically, what it means is that they're doing like some sort of a clinical trial. The result is presented in some sort of a like text-based report, right? Report presented as a result of the clinical trial, right? Oh my God, this is not that annoying. Okay, and then we're going to use that to make some sort of a recommendation based on the results that we see, right? For example, let's just like keep it simple, say diagnosis of yes or no, right? Of okay, give me 1 second. Yes or no. Okay, so that's it. That's it. All we're gonna do is kind of keep it simple and say that it doesn't really matter, to be honest, so much what sort of data it is or like what sort of diagnosis we're dealing, what sort of diseases that we're dealing with. What matters is we're taking a bunch of text, right? And we're gonna take all those texts and then use them to kind of make some sort of a diagnosis, right? So the question now we're still kind of trying to answer, keep in mind, guys, is what do we want to do? Do we want to use a large language model, use a pre-trained model like GPT, or we're going to build our own model? And we already kind of got a little bit of a clarity on what we're dealing with here, right? We said it's, let's say it's clinical trial data. It's basically the result of the clinical trial. And now we're trying to get a sense of what the diagnosis means based on that report that has been written, right? So go ahead. I'm curious to know, Harita, what are your thoughts?
Oh, hi, Bijan. So I think my follow-up question on any of this would be, who are the users? Is it internal or external? Because there's a huge HIPAA and compliance the minute we hear patient data.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Thank you so much for that. And you're asking kind of for more clarity. This is an important question. Let's say for now, right? The consumers, right? The consumers of the report of the diagnosis results are the medical staff, right? They're going to use this to kind of figure out whether or not they think this, this particular diagnosis has happened or not happened, right? Okay, so thank you so much. I think we're kind of already narrowing down the scope of the question, but let's continue, see what else we can do. Scott, I can see your hand is up. Go ahead. What other things can you think of for us to kind of get clarity on to further narrow down the scope of the question?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, when it's a yes or no for diagnosis, it seems to imply logistic regression, but I'm going to sort of throw that out of hand because you say it's text data, and that leads me to the question of, excuse me, please, how much historical data do we have on what the diagnosis criteria are for whatever this disease model is? And the reason I ask that is because whether we want to fine tune for high quality or use RAG, but partly for privacy reasons, has implications. So how much historical do we have on this to potentially fine tune? And then, as was already said, is this data blinded or is it related? Is going to have PII, personally identifiable information in it?
Got it. Okay, great questions. So two great questions you asked. One of them was, how much historical data do we have on this? Not much, right? So I'm just going to kind of say not much. We don't have a lot of historical data, so we kind of have to gather some of that. And then the other part was, is the data blinded or privacy protected? Yes, it is privacy. Privacy is important, right? So this is kind of a good example of like kind of dealing with like a situation where like we're dealing with trade-offs. Like in one case, we don't have a lot of data. On the other side, we're saying like, we care about privacy. So like, how do we actually find a path forward, right? And in reality, in a real world, right, we would be probably spending, if not many hours, many weeks just to kind of hammer out the details of the problem statement, right? Because the reason in many cases we cannot answer a question as a product manager is not because the question is kind of impossible to answer. In my opinion, in many cases is because the problem statement, the question statement is not clear, right? So I think it's a good thing for us to kind of keep in mind. In reality, if you had more time, we would be spending so much more time to kind of think about so many additional questions. But let's keep in mind, the main goal here is for us to kind of go through this exercise and kind of saying, okay, when we're dealing with like a trade-off situation, we try to get as much clarity as we can on the core of the problem so that we can clearly define it. Okay, so we've already done it. We've done a little bit of it. And in reality, if you had more time, we'd be doing more. But like, let's move on to the next phase. What's the next thing that we want to do after, let's say, we've got a pretty clear idea of what the problem statement is? Like, what's the next thing that we want to do? Who's interested in helping me, maybe raising their hand and sharing their thoughts? Okay, go ahead. Kareem, go ahead. What are your thoughts?
So I believe that the next step is we are going to decide the features of the application. For example, how users will access, do they need like specific credentials and this stuff, because it should be access for specific medical people and not to all, something like this.
Okay, so I would slightly reword your suggestion and call it we want to define the attributes that matter rather than calling them features, because maybe what's more important, right? What's more important is what matters to us at this moment in time rather than the particular features that we want to build, right? Because you can kind of answer that feature set easily once you know what's really important to you at this time. So let's kind of go down that path of like attributes that are important and like think about them. And I would love to hear what are some of the attributes that matter in this case. I mean, there's like a couple of them that was already brought up, right? I think one that Scott mentioned that's very important is privacy, right? We have to kind of think about privacy. Which path we go, it probably has some impact on the privacy side. Like we have to think about whether or not that solution is okay from a privacy perspective, whichever path we go. I think another aspect that we mentioned was maybe historical data. But I'm curious to know, Scott, I can see your hand is up. Please go ahead and like feel free to share like some of the attributes that come to your mind, and I'll be listing them, and then we'll kind of see how it becomes relevant as we try to answer this question. Go ahead.
Well, I'll give you two. One is frequency of update. If this is for clinical trials, one attribute should be ease of update for multiple trials. I'm making an assumption here. This would be part of questions. Is this a one-time run thing, or is this probably multiple times? So it's ability to ingest new trial information easily would be one attribute. And then a second is, and this goes back to the question that I didn't ask, none of us asked really, was what's the quality level requirement here? You know, what are we doing here? I mean, there's going to be a human in the loop, a doctor, but if we're saying somebody's diagnosed, yes or no, depending on what this is, that's kind of a big deal, right? Because there's going to be ostensibly a treatment regimen after that. You get it wrong, you could hurt or kill somebody. So what's the quality requirement here? And the answer to the specific question is the attributes that are important is high quality, because that might imply the difference between using RAG versus fine tuning as well.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. And I think you really brought up an important point, which is what, you know, in the context of what things matter to us at this moment in time, you're kind of asking what metrics matter to us at this moment in time, right? A really important question, right? Does accuracy matter, right? Are we dealing with like, you know, diagnosis of like a life-threatening situation? Or not dealing with a diagnosis of a life-threatening situation, right? Because that probably has an impact on our level of comfort with another metric, right? Recall versus precision, right? So really good question. I'm just going to go back and add that question and say, is this a life-threatening diagnosis, right? Disease? If if basically diagnosed, right? Let's say for the sake of the argument, the answer is yes, right? So just kind of trying to kind of think about it that way. Okay, so we talked about accuracy. Curious to know between recall versus precision, who has some thoughts on which maybe matters more than the other? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I do. It's got to get precision,
Okay,
unquestionably.
got it. It's got to be precision. I'm curious to know, does anybody else have any other opinion?
Should we put the thresholds or typical ranges? So, like for example, high, low, this stuff, or it's something unrelated.
Well, I mean, I want to kind of like talk a little bit more about recall versus precision at first, because it's such an important question, right? One thing that kind of comes to my mind when I think about recall versus precision, right, is we said, okay, is this a life-threatening disease if diagnosed, right? I think the question that we kind of have to ask ourselves maybe is, what happens if we misdiagnose it? Right? If we, for example, mistakenly diagnose it as let's say a false positive, right? What are the consequences of that versus a false negative, right? So let's say for the sake of the argument that we say, okay, if we mistakenly identify somebody as false positive, it's not a big deal because we can kind of redo the test and maybe we will get a different result and things will get clear, right? So false positive, not the end of the world. But false negative will be a big deal, right? Because we would be missing this particular patient situation and we won't be treating them. So with that in mind, I'm curious to know what are people's thoughts on that? Should we do recall or precision?
I
Recall
would
would
go
make
with
sense.
recall. Yeah.
Sorry, can you raise your hand and then speak? Who was that? Go ahead.
So I can start. So I was going to say recall
Okay.
because for the reason that you stated, one, because you want to make sure that you are finding as many of those cases, the false negative. And second reason is I think there's also the question of the user here, right? So since we are dealing with medical staff and not the actual patients, for the medical staff, it's better you give them more relevant information, and for the actual end patient, then you want to be more precise there because you don't want to give them any alarm. So yeah.
Got it. Okay, cool. That makes sense. I would agree with you, and especially given the additional context that I provided, that basically changes things a little bit, right? Okay, so let's think about more attributes that are relevant here. Can we think about a few other ones? Like what other things that matter? Go ahead, Scott.
Hey, sorry, I would just like to discuss for a moment the precision versus recall for a minute, and maybe it's my lack of understanding here, but precision could be type 1 or type 2 errors. It could be false negative or false positive. In this case, false negative is the most critical. Recall, as I understand it for AI, is similar to typical search, where it's a matter of did you get all the instances? And in this case, if we're talking about an individual rating for an individual diagnosis, I'm not even sure if recall matters, because if you're asking a question for an individual, the recall is going to be 100% because you're targeting that individual, right? So recall is going to be a non-issue here. So precision seems to me the only thing that matters because that's the thing that's going to hurt or kill. Anyway, just wondering about the trade-off there.
Okay, so to be honest, this is such a lengthy it's almost like a can of worms that I'm trying to avoid getting myself into, because we have done one session on recall versus precision. I want to park this and say do a session on this. I'll try to coordinate this with either Kai or Corey to kind of discuss this a little bit more.
Okay, yeah,
it's
we can leave it for now. It's something that would, I think, bear more discussion, but okay.
Fair enough. Yeah. Now, let's think about what other attributes are important here. I can see Vishal, you've raised your hand. What are some of the attributes that in like a traditional product management perspective matter? Like What are some of those? Like, can you share some of them with me?
See, I can think of cost as another attribute which is important.
Cost. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
This is great, right? Cost is very important, right? What else along the same
And from
lines?
LLM standpoint, I would also look at if in case there are pre-trained models available with that set of information in the market.
Sorry, say it again. What was
Are
the
there any
attribute?
pre-trained models that are available that we can use
Got it, got
with
it.
the
Like, yeah, like I guess you're asking if we're doing fine tuning, or if you're using an existing model, you're saying can we does the model support our use case? Is that your question?
correct? So if I look at the market, which all LLM models are available already, and in case there's similar problem has already been solved.
Got it. Okay, so let's assume for now that yes, the LLM supports it to an extent. It just doesn't have a lot of historical data on it. Like supporting it is not too hard, right? Basically, if you have the data, right? You just have to kind of do the training and then you can support it, right?
Okay.
So let me list another one. Time to market, right? That's probably like a big one, right? Especially in this particular context, like the time to market between 1 versus 2 is very significant, right? And depending on where you are with your product maturity, probably one attribute is more important than the other, right? Can somebody give me like 1 or 2 more? Like, and to be honest, in a real world, go ahead, somebody raise their hand. Shrikant, go ahead.
So I was going to say the skill set of the team.
Great question, great item. Do we have the ML expertise to build our own model, right? Or do we want to even do that at this point in time, right? So, and in reality, right, we would probably be spending a lot of time to hammer this out. Like I can tell you that in my full-time roles in the past, when I was given a technical question not related to AI, I spent a lot of time meeting with technical folks to really understand their perspective on what sort of trade-offs we're dealing with. And I kind of had to go back and forth between different team members to hammer out the details and figure out, oh, this thing is more important than the other one in this particular case, and here's why, right? So just a reminder here, we're just kind of trying to showcase the thinking process and not necessarily list out every single attribute, but in reality, you're probably going to come up with a bunch and you're going to decide some are more important than the other. How do we do that? It's going to be done given what we're going to do in the next phase. So what's the next thing that we're going to have to do? Like what's after let's say we've gathered a list of attributes, what's the next thing that we want to do? Who's interested in helping me? Go ahead, Karim.
To specify the application features.
I would say first we need to have a goal,
A goal.
right? What's our goal at this particular moment in time, right? What is our, and I'll give you a few different examples. Like if you were starting out a brand new project, right? Not even funded, you're kind of in very early stages. It's very different than a context of, you're a mature team, mature project, you have very different set of goals. So it really goes back to what maybe this is not the first model. Maybe we already had one model and now we're thinking about doing another one, right? So in that particular case, the goal here would be very different, right? So for this particular example, who can give me some suggestions on what would be maybe a potentially good goal for us to pick?
Maybe reduce the amount of time the medical staff spends by, I don't know, by 50%, have a metric like that. Is that what we're thinking?
Got it. So can you maybe rephrase it a little bit on what are we trying to achieve with this particular project? Like
So-
you're almost there. I just want to make
Yeah,
sure.
let's just say they were handling 10 cases a day,
Okay.
and now they'll be able to handle 20 cases a day. And maybe those are the metrics that we're gonna go after, but the goal is to make sure that, the maximum patients are served. by one medical staff.
So, what would be the goal of basically the goal for this project at this point in time? Like, can you think of like a goal that would represent as a kind of the guiding principle for you to make a decision here? I'll come back to you in a minute. No problem. And the purpose is like for us to learn, so that's totally
Yeah.
fine. Thank you so much for trying it out. Mandeep, what do you think?
Hi, sorry, I just want to look at the problem statement again. If you can go a little back and take a look at it again.
Okay, so the problem statement is we want to be able to extract information from medical documents. We want to train a model with patient data to make the results more relevant. Which option is better? Do we use existing pre-trained models, or do we build our own model using like something like Hugging Face?
I think we kind of said that their, results are more relevant. So I think that's the goal we're going after, right? More relevant results.
Okay, so I'll come back to you in a second. Let me quickly go to Shrikant, then Scott, then Sherry, and we'll kind of see where we go from there. Okay, go ahead, Shrikant. What are your thoughts?
So I was going to say, adding in what Haritha said too. So it's more like improving the efficiency while at the same time ensuring that we have a certain recall, a certain percentage of accuracy.
Okay, so you're saying that you want to validate the hypothesis at this moment in time on can we improve efficiency, right? Using our model, right? And efficiency,
While at this, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and efficiency is defined based on what Harita was saying earlier, defined maybe as time, reduced time spent on deciding on the diagnosis, right? Right, that's kind of like what you're saying. Is that right?
I don't know if it's time, but I was thinking since we are going to do a yes or a no, we might get to those ones who need attention sooner, right? So let's say out of 100, the 30 people, and since we kept recall, so we know out of 30, we know 30 people who might have this problem more likely, right? And the other 70 are okay. So those 30 we get to them sooner.
Maybe time to diagnosis. Does that make more sense? Okay, cool. All right, go ahead. Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say something similar, just perhaps in a different way. I was going to say results occurring in a timely enough manner to interdict with patients, because whatever they're doing now perhaps isn't fast enough and there's not enough time to treat. So that's my definition of timeliness. It's are we getting a result fast enough to interdict with patients? And something else came to mind, but it escapes me. If I remember it, I'll say so.
Got it. Okay, perfect. So let me go to the next person. Maybe we'll spend a couple more minutes here. Go ahead, Sagar, Rajesh, and then we'll continue from there.
Just a quick question before I answer. Like when you say set a goal, the goal is basically to compare whether we are building our own or we are using an external GPT, or is the goal for the use case itself of what?
The goal is for the product in this moment in time. What is the thing that we were trying to achieve? What is the thing that we're trying to focus on? Like, what's our objective, right? At this moment in time. I'm not talking about the product goal that is kind of a longer term aspirational that doesn't really change so much over time. This is more about at this moment in time, in this particular project, what is our goal? Like, what are we trying to focus on? What are we trying to achieve? Because if you know what you're trying to achieve, then it's so much easier for you to deal with the trade-offs, right? And I think what is currently emerging right now in the conversations is that the goal is for us to see whether or not we can actually improve efficiency, right? And that is defined as like basically reducing time to diagnosis using some sort of an ML model. Right? Okay, perfect, cool. So I'm gonna go to one more person, Rajesh, and then I have to continue just because we have limited time. Rajesh, go ahead, and then after you, we're gonna have to continue. You're muted.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So all what has been said on the goal is definitely makes sense. I feel like we should simplify it and believe like it's some kind of a screening system we are trying to develop. So screening system should be a goal, can be a goal here. When we say efficiency, all we are trying to do is like detect the positive cases
Yeah.
faster. So screening can be our first goal.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think I would probably depend, given that this is a fairly new product, right? Like that we're kind of building. I would probably think more along the size of we want to validate and see whether or not it can basically solve a real problem, whether or not it can validate that key hypothesis, right? Rather than the goal is for it to build a system. Like I think what we should do is say we want to validate whether or not a system could be built, right? Because keep in mind, this is a fairly new technology. This is a fairly new, like you're just trying to see it's you can think of it almost as an if statement. Like we're trying to see whether or not it's doable, right? And when you think about it from that perspective of we're trying to see whether or not it's doable, right? All of a sudden, certain things become far more important than the other things, because if you can answer the if question, then you know that you can like kind of deprioritize some of the things that are more related to optimization down the road because you want to get to that answer as soon as possible, right? So now with that, I want to kind of move on because we have some limited time, but I kind of quickly recap what we've done so far. Of course, we didn't do it in the level of detail that in a real case would have been done, but we spent some time to really understand the question. Then we spent some time to think about the attributes that are important. Then we said, okay, we got a goal. Right now, our goal is to validate whether or not we can actually improve efficiency using our model, right? And now the question is, do we actually need to have every single case to be good enough for us to validate this hypothesis or not? Maybe we can address that optimization side sometime down the road. We can still improve efficiency. We can still validate our hypothesis, right? So with that said, what do we do next? What's the next thing that we need to do? We've identified our attributes. We've identified our goal, right? There are a bunch of other things, like I said, we could have probably included in the attributes that we're not doing for now. And by the way, every team might have a different, every product group might have a different opinion on what the goals should be, right? Sometimes there could be some discussions within the product team or on what the goals should be, and that usually changes the direction of the project, right? So that's another thing for us to keep in mind, right? Okay, so we got a goal, we got attributes. What's the next thing that we need to do? Right? Probably evaluate them using our goal, right? And attributes, right? Like this is what we're trying to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly draw a table to kind of help us out with this, right? I'm just going to draw a quick table here. And what's going to be on the column is going to be what's going to be on the rows is going to be basically the attributes that we got here. Privacy, right? We said privacy, we said frequency of change, right? Accuracy, for the sake of the argument, let's say recall, cost, right? And then I'm going to add a couple other ones. We said time to market, right? Skill set, right? And there are many other things that we can add, but for now, I'm just going to skip them, right? And then we got two options here, right? One option is use GPT, right? The other option is build our own model. Okay, perfect. So we got some sort of a table that helps us make a decision. Now, how do we actually go about filling this out? Curious to know who's interested in maybe helping me evaluate our two options from a privacy perspective? Who would be interested in kind of helping us with that? Okay, go ahead. You've raised your hand, Harita. Go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, a no on using GPT for privacy. If privacy is a high concern, a no on that, and yes on building our own model.
Okay. So here's one thing that would also add. Is there a way for us to abstract that a little bit so that there's not much of a privacy involved? Like if we can take some information from the users. And the reason I'm saying this is because we said privacy, we didn't say proprietary technology, right? We're talking about user privacy.
So if it's PII or PHI,
Okay.
then it's a strict no. If not, I think there is some room.
Okay, go ahead, Scott. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, who just said it right? I believe she said it right. There's the risk of data leakage if there's PII at all going into GPT, and there's only two models here: GPT or build your own model. And there could be a small model out there that's subject matter specific that doesn't require us to build our own. I mean, that wasn't an option, but that's possible as well. So I agree with what was just said. I'd say no on GPT because of the privacy.
Got it. So I guess no, maybe with a small model, right? It could be a yes, right? Basically, that's what you're saying, right? Okay, cool. That makes sense. And then now, just like one thing to kind of keep in mind, as I said, use existing pre-trained models such as GPT, right? So the reason I'm highlighting this is because this kind of says no to maybe GPT, and I'm also partially guilty for this. I should have said models such as GPT, right, to kind of make it clear. But maybe with some smaller model, it's okay, right? Build your own model. What are the thoughts there? I guess that's pretty fairly straightforward answer, right? Vishal, I can see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Right. See, I just want to add one thing in use your
Sure.
model such as GPT. See, data cleanup is also an option, right? Since we're talking about PII data, we can clean up the data of any private information and use it in
Yeah.
GPT as well if required.
Yeah. So I guess the answer would be maybe, right? It
Yeah.
sounds like there is a way for us to make it work. Kind of be
Yeah.
respectful to privacy in the short term by being selective on the model and like maybe extracting some information, right? It's not a strict no. There could be a way for us to make it work. That's important for us to kind of identify, right? But what about the build your own model? Would you
Definitely yes. Yep.
Right? Okay, perfect. So we can have basically yes delivered pretty easily. Okay, cool. So frequency of change. So this was an interesting one that you mentioned, Scott, because you basically highlighted that, look, given new information is kind of coming in on a frequent basis, maybe the quality of the results or the inference will not be very high, right? Because new information is coming in, and maybe if we're not training new model, if it's not trained based on the latest model, maybe it's not as good. I'm curious, is that what you meant when you kind of highlighted the frequency of change?
Yeah, and there's some stuff going on in the chat that I think speaks to the privacy thing too. I mean, even a small model might have information leakage. So you know, so maybe it's not really maybe, but yeah, frequency of change. I meant that you're going to run one trial and then there's going to be another and another. Are you going to do them weekly or monthly? You know, or things like that. So how much does it have to be updated? So you don't want to have to retrain a whole model. So the answer here is I think that, I'm sorry, this is taking too long. The answer here would be no. The
Okay.
frequency of change, your own model isn't going to have a high frequency of change. Otherwise, it'd be ridiculously expensive.
Yeah. So not a high frequency, right? So it's not basically, and you're saying kind of it's not an issue, right? Is that fair to
Yeah,
say that?
it is fair. And again, we're missing a column here, I think, because if you could put fine tuning or RAG on top of this,
Yeah.
that's where the frequency of change would occur.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So I would just add note not considering fine not considering RAGs, right?
Yeah, fine tuning or RAGs really, but yeah.
Okay, perfect. because and the reason I'm kind of hesitant to say fine tuning or RAGs is because like nowadays building your own model is being more and more defined as like fine tuning in many cases. Like people are not really starting from scratch as much as before, right? So it's kind of important to kind of keep that in mind. So maybe building our own model is really fine tuning in some shape and form, right? So for that reason, I would say let's just like say RAGs for now. That's the reality of the world that we're living in now. People are not really starting from scratch. Okay, cool. From an accuracy perspective, what are our thoughts? Who's interested in helping me kind of fill out this role? Go ahead, Vishal.
Yeah, so if you need high, if the accuracy need is high, then you would prefer to build your own model rather than using a chat GPT.
Yeah,
So it would be
got it.
no for GPT and
Got it. Okay, so low and high, and I think it's probably fair to say that we can have the same assessment on the recall as well, right?
yep. Yep.
So same issue. So I guess the quality will basically be lower, right? Now on the cost side, who's interested in kind of helping me cost some time to market? Go ahead, Sagar.
From a cost, I think it's going to be high initial and maintenance cost.
Yeah.
But from a external perspective, it's potential subscription. It's based on usage.
Yeah. So this is you're saying basically if you use an existing model, the cost is low because training has already happened, but building your own model is very high, right?
Yeah, initially, but like you do have
Yes.
maintenance, but yeah,
That's a good point to bring up. So let me highlight that. High in the long run, right? Because now you're using a third-party service and you got to pay them for per inference basis, low in the long run, right?
Yeah.
So thanks so much for highlighting that. Let me just like. Okay, perfect. What about time to market? Who's interested in kind of giving me an answer for this one? Maybe Kareem, I can see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just have a question, but yeah, not answering the time to market. What do we mean by recall here exactly? Because maybe I missed it. Sorry.
So like you're familiar with the technical definition of recall or no?
No.
Okay, so it would just take a bit of a time for me to kind of get into what the definition of each of the terms are. But just like quickly search it online, like it'll give you a definition, but basically at a very high level, basically it ensures that it measures the proportion of actual positive cases that are correctly identified by the model. That's how you can think of it. But like just Google search it, you can find out what the definition of recall and precision and accuracy are. Time to market. Who's interested? Sherry, would you like to kind of define what time to market means?
Yeah, sure. If I understand it right, the idea here in time to market is how easily we can build it and we can
Okay.
have the results. And so, keeping that assumption in mind, time to market would be lower if we use a third party tool for a very according to my understanding, because everything is there, it's trained, but in other case we'll have to build it, use the data. This is how at least I understand it.
Okay, who's interested in kind of making the counter argument? Like, which one would be faster? Where would our time to market be faster if we use a third-party model? Let me see. Somebody raised their hand that hasn't really spoken. Okay, Harish, go ahead.
I think it would be similar to the cost factor, right? In the time to market will be quicker in the short run, but in the long run, when you are actually able to fine tune your local model or your own model, it will be quicker.
Got it. So it's basically fast to get to the market, but slow for maybe improving quality,
enhancements,
right? That's kind of the tricky part is like, yes, we can quickly get to the market because you are using an existing model that is already trained, but it's going to be slow, right? Skill set. What are our assessments on this. Who's interested? Maybe Sagar, go ahead.
There's one more person who's raised up their hand if they
Yeah, I
want
can't see their name. It just says iPhone. So
iPhone. If they want to speak
Yeah,
up.
this is Baba here. I can go ahead on the skill set side. For the skill set side, you need like some specific skill sets, like domain expertise, along with like your machine learning expertise, and so I think that is relevant in terms of the skill sets. If you're like trying to build something, through a third party or using GPT, while on building your own model, you'll need like a lot more depth, not only in the engineering side, but also on data science, as well as on the domain side of as well. So depending on the investment and the ROI analysis and the budget, I believe we will try and go with the first option, using models with GPT.
got it, got it. Okay, perfect. This is great. So basically, what you said is that look, we don't need a lot of skill set. Like at least we don't need a lot of expensive ML talent, right? Engineers, data scientists, etc. If we're using a model like GPT, right? But in the other case, if we wanted to build our own model, like it's just gonna cost us a lot more. We're gonna have to go find the right talent, make sure they have the right expertise, they understand our data, all that stuff. And that kind of shows its effect on time to market, shows its effect on the cost side and all those different things, right? So, and like I said before, in reality, if you're kind of dealing with a real case, there are probably many other attributes that we didn't highlight, right? Like, for example, we would probably have a pretty clear idea of what our budget for this project is, right? That budget will probably have a very direct impact on which of these paths that we're going to go. But we have a sense, I guess, at a very high level here, because we said this is a fairly new project. We're kind of trying to test out this thing, see if it's going to work. So with all that said, I'm curious to know, do we think that we know enough to be able to make a meaningful recommendation, given what we know of the goal, our analysis of the different options that are in front of us, the trade-offs that we looked at? Who would be interested in maybe kind of taking the next step and making a recommendation? And that recommendation, ideally, we want it to be kind of explained clearly so that we have a sense of, where that recommendation is coming from. Go ahead, Harish.
I mean, there is one factor of this privacy. Excluding that, I would recommend using GPT model.
Got it. So I want to reword what you just said a little bit, right? And say, if we find a way to address privacy concerns in the short term, right? If we can find a way to address privacy concerns in the short term, right? You're saying, and I'm curious to know, let me ask you a question, Harish, does this seem like a good decision in the long run as well?
It's definitely not. Given that we want to come up with a working solution initially. In the short run, it would be ideal to go with an existing model. And for the long run, it would be more beneficial to have our own model developed.
Got it. So basically what you're saying is that given that our goal at this phase is not to have something that works all the time, it's very efficient in terms of cost and everything. Given our goal is to just like validate the hypothesis that something like this could improve the efficiency of maybe we find out that like, look, once you come up with the diagnosis, nothing still moves within the organization because there are all these other bottlenecks that exist in the process. Like it just waits until the Monday of the upcoming week before anybody reviews it. I don't know what it is, but maybe we find out there's no efficiency that's been gained, right? So if our goal right now is just to validate that hypothesis that we've defined, maybe we can live with the high cost. Maybe we can live with the lower accuracy, maybe we can live with not so perfect privacy or kind of find a hacky way of addressing it in the short term because we're just trying to validate that hypothesis, right? And then once we do that, then in the long run, you're saying consider building your own model, right? After you validate your hypothesis, right? That's what you're really saying. And I
Yeah,
want
that's right.
I want to go around and kind of get other thoughts on this. Curious to know if anybody has any other perspectives on this. I can see two people have raised their hands, so I'll go to Surab first, and then I'll come to Scott. Just going to Surab first because Surab hasn't spoken. First time he's raising his hand, so go ahead, Surab.
Yeah. Hi, Bijan. Thanks a lot for the framework. Just one quick question around prioritization of these attributes. Do you think in the long run or in real practice, we would probably use some sort of a RICE score to prioritize these attributes so that we can come with a statistical or slash scientific way of coming to a recommendation? I mean, I agree with the recommendation, but is there a way that I can give weights to these attributes? Like, for example, privacy is the most important attribute that I see. Probably cost comes close second, and then skill set probably third. But is there a way that I can represent that in a numerical form to come up with a solution?
Yeah, so to be honest, like in my experience, it's hard to put that part into a framework because every company has a different set of objectives, different budget, priorities, risks, expertise, everything else. The best way to do this is to just do the hard work of speaking to a lot of people within the organization, kind of do the back and forth, get their opinion, hear their thoughts on why you're right or wrong, and kind of collectively come to an agreement on what you think are the most important attributes. Yeah, that's how I would have done it. I find it to be kind of the easiest, fastest way because every project will have some unique attributes that will probably not fit into like a particular framework. And this way, when you kind of do the the grind work, the hard work of like identifying the attributes through conversations, you end up avoiding making like missing a particular attribute that turns out to be 10 times more important than everything else that you would have thought about that are like kind of standard product management ones, right? So that would be my approach. Spend a lot of time with the engineers to kind of get a sense of that, especially if you're dealing with an R&D environment, because there's probably some sort of an attribute that one person in the organization knows and nobody else knows about, and it turns out to be a really important attribute.
So then just one short follow-up question, and I'll pass it on to Scott. But who is your primary stakeholder when it comes to deciding the weight? So, for example, time to marketing would be the most important function out there. They would be shouting out loud that I want the fastest product to be released. Finance would be shouting out loud for I want it to be at the cheapest cost. Privacy, legal would be at the most important
right, legal,
privacy. Then who do you decide upon to go ahead with?
So I personally think that's the job of a PM, but you don't make that decision unilaterally. It has to be collaboratively. And the way I think about it is that, so the way I position it when I'm doing this in a full-time scenario is I would say I want sign off, right? So it means that I'm driving this, I'm coming up with the recommendations, but I want to make sure people understand why we're making certain trade-offs. And if they feel strongly against that for probably good reasons because of their expertise, they push back. So, but I think that it should sit with the product manager because PM is the one that really takes all these different perspectives into consideration. Anyways, we're right on time. I want to go to Scott, and then after that, we're going to end the session.
Okay, I'll try and go fast. So my recommendation would have been to cheat and test both models, if at all possible.
Okay.
Large and custom, because we're talking about high criticality here and high risk and high liability. But if not, I'd like to suggest that probably the small model is better because you need to eliminate the noise from the large model. Because I'm not even sure you can test the hypothesis with the large model because there may be too much noise and your results may be garbage. So you would need to test both. Like that assumption on my part right there would require testing both just to see what the difference would be. And my last comment would be, so I'd use the small model. I'd put RAG on top of it because that would give you some tools for privacy and for auditability. So that probably would have been my recommendation and the rationale for it.
Got it. So you're saying that, look, maybe in order for us to validate the hypothesis, right? It's not enough for us to showcase that this thing works in something like a GPT or a small model. Like we actually need to show that this thing works in more realistic scenarios with like higher accuracy. For that reason, I would say we should try both, because maybe it doesn't work with the pre-trained model because doesn't have good training of the data, but it would work actually in a case where you have good data. And that's a very valid point. And by the way, this is where product management comes in. Product managers will have different opinion on the attributes, will have different opinion on the goals, will have different opinion on the recommendations. And that's why our job is so much fun. So
I'm sorry that my last point was just to use a small model that's maybe domain specific into medical, because my concern would be there'd be too much noise in the general one. And that was it. Yep.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'm going to include the link here just for those of you that would like to refer. Hope you guys found this session helpful. And you know, like I said, like we kind of like try to do something that's typically done in you know, many weeks of work, collaborative team effort. We did it in 1 hour. Hope you guys had fun. I personally think that this kind of framework really tells us that no, we don't need to be the most technical person in the team. We can always follow some sort of framework to arrive at a meaningful recommendation. For those of you who are interested in joining the next cohort, here's the link to the upcoming cohort. Today is the last day to get the discount. Thank you so much, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed it, and please participate in the survey. And by the way, for the current cohort participants, the demo days are not going to be next week because many people are out of the office. It's going to be the week after. We already posted an announcement in our Slack channel. We'll see you guys soon. You guys are going to meet the alumni of the cohort AIPM learning program as well. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day. And yes, you will see the recordings as well. Take care. Bye.
What I love is the structured, the structured way of knowledge, and the beauty is at least our instructor is you know the way he is structuring the information, the data, and controlling the time. It's really fantastic. I'm very satisfied, and it is a combination of the knowledge, which is more like information or theory, but then we are doing the workshop, and you will I mean, not you surprised, but what we are enjoying is that the surprise is practical for the PMs, right? So mostly what we think of that, okay, the workshop or the you know, the practical thing for the engineering team, this doesn't work that way, right? So right now what we are working on, say as an example, the PRD, and in parallel we are doing the little workshop as well, where we are brainstorming whether it's a particular use case is rule-based versus it should be required the LLM versus other ML model and stuff like that, right? So it's a combination, and if you are able to relate with what you're doing in your office, it gives you a whole lot of sense. And thank you so much, Bijan, because I'm sure that there's a whole lot of brainstorming with you and team has done to produce something like that. It is not just, you know, come out of the blue. It's definitely whole lot of behind the scene effort is going on. So thank you so much for you and on for, you know, the entire team which is working behind the scene, right?